Good morning, everybody. Time to kick off. I am Elliot Crow, and I am part of LBNL's team for the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. We have had 69 people sign up for today's webinar, which is a terrific response. We've got energy managers, analysts, engineers, along with service providers and many more. Just to note, we will be recording today's presentation to be posted on our campaign website. We will also be sending out the slide deck to all of you. We have allowed plenty of time for Q&A, so please ask any questions using the chat function at the bottom of your webinar screen. Those are questions you can put in at any time. And that is enough for me. We have a really packed agenda. So I'm going to hand you off now to Hannah Kramer, who is technical lead for the campaign.
Thanks, Elliot. Like Elliot said, we have a lot to cover today. This is a bit of what we'll be covering, and I'll be giving kind of an overview at the beginning of some research that LBNL has put together, both on the costs and benefits, and creating kind of a top 10 of metrics and analytics for use with meter level data. So we're going to get right to it here. In order to get to our featured speakers from Aurora Public Schools and Carleton College, and they're going to give us all the nitty-gritty details of what it's like for them to implement their EIS to support their energy management goals. So just a little bit of background, making sure everyone understands the terminology we're using. There's lots of different terminology out there. On EMIS, Energy Management and Information System Tools, there's two tracks. This particular webinar is going to focus on the meter level EMIS. So the meters, all sorts of energy meters, from whole building to sub-meters, different fuels. And even more specifically, we're going to focus on energy information systems, which are defined as having more granular data. So having at least hourly meter data and the ability to look at really what's going on hour by hour in the day. We're also going to be looking at and talking about the capabilities of advanced EIS, which is defined more as having an analytical layer on top of that. So while an EIS make all this data easy to get at your fingertips, advanced EIS adds automated analytics on top of that. So you have less manual analysis to do. So you have these tools. Tools are great, but if you don't do anything with the tools, then they're not so useful. So the monitoring-based commissioning process is the name that's currently being used for what you do with these kinds of EMIS tools. You collect the data, the tools perform the analytics. Some of the analytics is manual by looking at standard plots and charts, and then you figure out what to do and verify improvement. So the MBCx process is a continuous process of improvement by basically using the data that you gather through your EMIS. We have a whole bunch of stuff on business case. I'm not going to go very deep into this. This is all on the Smart Energy Analytics campaign website, and we'll be giving these slides out so you'll have all the links directly to the research. This research was from a couple of years ago, where we have the results showing for folks that have installed EIS, this is how much energy they've saved over time. So we're not saying that the energy savings is directly from EIS, but these were people who had EIS, had better view into really what was going on in their buildings, and 17% for individual sites and 8% for portfolios were pretty good results from folks that had EIS, and 90% said they couldn't achieve it without that. So all this information is going to be updated through the Smart Energy Analytics campaign research reports that are coming out, and this data is from 2013. We're going to keep updating it over time. As a part of that study in 2013, this is what the savings look over time. So the point of these graphs are to show that both for individual sites and portfolios, the research showed that year after year, on average, the saving increases, meaning that you find more stuff as you get used to your systems and knowing how to look at the data and uncovering more opportunities over time. So this is interesting results that we'll continue to get data like this and provide more information through the campaign. Okay, so I just want to go through some top 10 metrics. We get a lot of questions about, what should I put in my dashboard? There's lots of different options out there for energy information system vendors, and we kind of decided to come up with a top 10 list. So I'm going to show some example screenshots, and then we will have a summary at the end so you can kind of say, okay, this is the list of 10. All right, so the first one is pretty straightforward. Energy use intensity is a pretty common thing to look at, so normalized usually by square footage. This is a graphic from UC Davis. They built their own EIS, and it's nice that they have primary use of building types so they can filter, look at EUI, rank ordered, also by primary use. So this is a pretty basic way to look at things, but it's often very useful to help you, especially for large portfolios. So we put that as the first one. A little bit of a variation on EUI is reporting the percent difference directly. So in this case, actually, it says 4.3% decrease over 1 week. That's actually, in this case, normalized with the energy model. So what it's saying is that given the same weather conditions, so projecting the energy use from last week to this week, and using the same weather conditions, you saved 4.3% that building. So this is helpful to have weather normalization as a part of your EUI analysis, so you're not just looking at changes based on weather. So that's one flavor of EUI that actually Berkeley is using. Another very common thing to look at is load profiles. This is from LBNL, the building that we're in at LBNL, Building 90, and you can see the load shape. This shows the last 30 days. Each gray line is a day. We have min, max, and average. So there's definitely things you can see in this, and it's nice to have a summary plot. You can look at weekdays and weekends and holidays and that kind of thing to try to identify scheduling issues and baseload issues and so forth. So load profile is very common. Another way to look at load profile over time is basically a heat map. This is actually one of the most popular graphics in EIS that we've seen our participants in the campaign using, where a green in this case means low energy use relative to the red means the highest. So you can see schedules. You can see if your base load is going down, if you've had problems in a certain time period, and you can tell over time if things are getting back to where you want them to be. So we'll see some examples of how Carleton is using this as well. Another way to look at scheduling is the calendar view. It's kind of useful in the fact that you can look and see, okay, these are all my Sundays. This particular energy information system has a flag for when it automatically notes that this Sunday, October 4th, is there's something going on here and it was out of norm. So it's creating a model, and it compares the energy use of a particular date type to a model. That can be helpful to flag the days without having to look at this all the time. So that scheduling on the calendar view can also be very helpful for holidays. Another metric, base to peak load ratio. This is a really good one that a lot of people are working on reducing their base load, and a metric to be able to look at your base load is called base load to peak ratio. So basically just divide your average base load by your peak and see what that fraction is. In this case, in this example, it's 0.5. We like to see it more like 0.3. It of course depends on what kind of building type you have, if you have a huge amount of data centers or labs that run 24/7, all those kinds of things. But so you can benchmark your base load against yourself over time and try to reduce it, or you can look at, for office buildings, a 0.3 or less is pretty good. A 0.5 has some room for improvement. And EIS can automatically calculate these metrics for you, so you don't have to manipulate any data to get this baseload to peak metric. All right, here's another one, energy signature you may have heard of or have in your energy information system. Basically, it's taking any consumption information. In this case, it's natural gas, hourly natural gas consumption, and plotting it versus outside air temperature. Sometimes within your energy information system, this is done behind the scenes, and there might be flags that come up when things are out of whack. Or you may just be able to look at this data directly and interpret what's going on. So in this case, you have unoccupied as gray. It's nice that unoccupied energy use is low. You can see your balance point. You can see the slope of this line. Some do regressions. So you can compare your heating slope, and you can compare that to benchmarks. So energy signature, either on the gas side or the electric side or the total BTU side, is a nice way to see if you have some simultaneous heating and cooling, or if you're doing reheat when you didn't want to be. So the next one is pretty powerful to be able to look at and calculate your savings using your energy information system. In this case, Berkeley is measuring their actual energy use in the purple, and the target is the model, the baseline model. So that's projected into the future for the current weather hour by hour. The difference between the blue and the purple are the savings. So you can accumulate that savings over time, tally it up, and use that for reporting purposes or for making sure that you have persistence in savings from particular projects. So EIS are useful in savings estimation and tracking. The same process is also useful for anomaly detection. So if you think about, we have a projection of energy use hour by hour. So that projection is in this dotted line here. And if you're going over that projection in your actual energy use, you could, by a certain percentage, you could make a flag that said, oh, something's going on here, I'm 20% higher, or whatever you wanted that threshold to be. So you can use that M&V process for hour-by-hour anomaly detection, or you can accumulate that energy waste and say if it's above a certain dollar amount of waste, that's when it's going to flag, and we're going to look into it more. So this is another really powerful use of energy information systems, and this would be considered an advanced energy information system. We're moving into a little bit on demand. So, we talk a lot about energy savings and energy efficiency. Energy information systems can also be used to help you manage your demand charges. So in this case, you can plot your load duration. So what percent of the time is your whole building at a particular load? So if you have a really high number of hours, or high load at low number of hours, you have some possibility to reduce that and shave off some of your demand charges. We haven't seen a lot of people doing this because most people are using their EIS for energy savings, but there definitely is this crossover into demand response and being able to see what kind of savings you're getting from demand response events, or just reducing your demand charges in general. All right, so I'm not going to go through this table here, but it's here to summarize exactly all the examples we showed. You're going to get all these slides, so you can say, oh, I see that's an example that I'm most interested in, and this column here to review will give you a little bit more detail about what you might want to be looking at. So here's the first 5, and here's the second 5. We also have a lot of EMIS resources related to this on our website that you're welcome to look at. Here's the address, and when we send out these slides, each of these will be a link directly to those resources. So if you're interested in specification, developing RFP, supporting that process, we have a number of resources in that area. Selection of systems. So this gives vendor by vendor lists or information about those vendors and those two resources, and then installation and use. So that MBCx process, how does that work? What do I have to think about for that to work well? All right, so that was our sort of overview of the top 10 metrics. I wanted to make sure everyone was aware, not everyone on this call is a part of the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. A number of you already are. We wanted to make sure you're aware of the campaign, and if you're interested in joining, know what it's all about. So the campaign launched 2016. It's going really well, and we have a lot of participants. What participants do is share information about what they're doing. They share your annual energy use and what kind of system you're using and so forth. It's all anonymized. And we pull all that information together and publish it because we're trying to bolster a better understanding of the state of the market and costs and benefits. More than anecdotal information, we're going to have more solid information in that area. So that's all published. We have our first year report out, and we'll be updating that as we get more information each year. The benefits of being a participant in the campaign, really one of the best benefits is you get connected to a whole lot of people trying to do the same thing that you are, and sharing of best practices, sharing of how you get over those barriers, what are the best enablers to success. We're sharing all that kind of information through the campaign. We also have a recognition piece. So the two folks that you're going to hear from did receive recognition from the campaign for exemplary use of EMIS. And there's technical assistance one-on-one with LBNL where we can help you get started, understand the resources, and help you move forward. Either you're starting out, just starting implementing, or you're sort of further down and you're tweaking what you're doing and want to enhance that. So we welcome all different types. And this is some of the year one results. We're up to actually now well over 185 million square feet. Currently we have 15 portfolios reporting. The average first year savings is 5%, but we think over time, actually that graph that I showed you earlier, it increases up into the teens. So we're going to get more data. 15 portfolios isn't enough, but we're going to continue to get more data and report it out and get that picture clearer for folks. So the year one campaign report is available. You'll have this link and has a whole lot of information on trends in delivery, enablers and barriers, and so forth. So check that out. We also have a webinar that we did last month on the report that's available through the campaign website. So with that, I'm going to pause here and give it back to Elliot, who's going to introduce our featured presenters.
Thanks very much, Hannah. As Hannah mentioned, we have recognition opportunities through the campaign. If you go to the technical assistance portion of our website, you will see you'll be able to get case studies on the 5 organizations that were recognized in the spring. Today we're talking about the fall recognition, and case studies for those will be up pretty soon. This fall we recognize participants for new installation of EMIS, and today you'll be seeing the 2 organizations recognized in the EIS category. Now as a concept, EIS are relatively straightforward, but in practice installing one across a portfolio of buildings can be extremely complicated. So a nice dashboard is just the tip of the iceberg, and below that you're looking to make sure you have good data, the right kind of analytics, as well as thinking about how the use of the EIS is embedded into daily management practices. Now, Aurora Public Schools and Carleton College are not new to tracking their energy consumption, but their recent efforts have really ramped up the use of EIS within their organizations. And I'm really excited to hear in their own words about the great work they've been doing. General note, please don't forget to send in any questions you have as we go through here. We're going to have about 20 minutes for Q&A after the presentations. So with that, first we'll be hearing from Craig Wright of Aurora Public Schools. Craig has over 20 years of experience in building energy optimization, As the district's Energy and Building Optimization Coordinator for the past 5 years, he's been overseeing deployment of the district's award-winning energy informatics solutions to prompt community awareness, foster interdependent perspectives, and inspire action. Over the past 3 years, the district has achieved 13% overall reduction in energy intensity. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much, Elliot, and it's a very great honor to be recognized with an award for our efforts in this area, and very much appreciate those on the phone that have chosen to take part of their day to listen in. To give you some background, I'm the Energy and Building Optimization Coordinator for a medium to large size school district bordering Denver to the east, roughly 40,000 students, 4.5 million square feet under management. And our students really come from an economically and culturally diverse background. 50% of our student population speak something other than English at home. Roughly 70% of our students are also qualify for free and reduced lunch. So what I hope to provide folks is a realistic perspective of APS's evolving adoption of technology and really shed light on the particularly painstaking challenges in stakeholder adaptation. So I hope my district wouldn't be too offended if I were to compare the energy collection system of our district of 60 buildings to, say, a bowling alley. I know that's kind of an unusual analogy to use, and I hope it resonates well with everyone. But if you could imagine a school district, we have the Taj Mahal of bowling alleys. Now, if you're familiar with school finance, there's an interesting circumstance in which schools find them flush with cash to spend on capital improvement or energy efficiency projects should their taxpayers approve bond issues on election day. We've been very fortunate to be recipients of those bond dollars to spend on capital improvements. However, our district, being as culturally and economically diverse as it is, spends a vastly larger proportion of its funds directly towards student engagement, student education, student growth, which makes sense, particularly considering our student population. So picture, if you will, we have the Taj Mahal of bowling alleys. This bowling alley, it's immaculate. However, in our district, because we have such few resources to devote toward maintenance and operations, besides myself, we essentially have one other building automation system technician, and I can't devote nearly even 50% of my time on managing energy. So we have implemented, to a very large degree, some very enhanced tools to manage energy. So if you could picture this bowling alley, we have lanes, several lanes. We have lanes on the left side, we have lanes on the right side. The lanes on the left side are devoted to our students. And if you're like me who raised kids, you're familiar with the bumpers that you can raise and lower on each side of the bowling alley that your kids are bowling on. And we also have lanes on the right side where we can raise and lower the bumpers on that side. The lanes on the left side for students, the lanes on the right side for our building management maintenance personnel. The goal is to knock over pins. So I say bowling, it's bowling for energy savings. So we have people in their various lanes, and the bumpers are up, to roll the bowling ball down the lane, attempting to knock down pins that represent dollars that the district can repurpose. So every pin knocked down represents several dollars or hundreds of dollars saved. So what also is unusual about this bowling alley is that the center alley is the width of a gutter. And the sides of the gutter, the sides of the bowling alley are the size of the gutters of the bowling alley are the size of the actual alley. So it's disproportionately opposite. So we have a very narrow strip down the center, and at the end of this very narrow strip of this lane, we have pins that are made of solid gold. And what I regard those pins as are our peak demand kWh. So as we have folks on our left side, our students bowling balls down their respective lanes to knock down pins, we have our maintenance personnel on our right bowling down their lanes to knock down pins. I'm trying to bowl down this very narrow, almost impossible strip of real estate to knock down the solid gold pins at the end. So looking at this image, the dashboard seen on the left are the students' bowling lanes with the bumpers up. They have some very select areas in which they can target their energy savings. And this is accommodated largely through the district's adoption of real-time energy meters or interval meters. We started out in the district with these being donated from a nonprofit out of Boulder called the Center for Resource Conservation. After a semester of using these to prompt student engagement, we then deployed these district-wide and then started our own conservation incentive program using energy savings to incent schools and returning money back to schools that demonstrated active participation by their students in energy conservation. The right-hand side of the screen shows another brief dashboard. This dashboard represents one of 3 geographies in which our maintenance and operations technicians are targeting our energy pins. Our pins at the end of the alley that they're knocking down with bowling balls, and the sides of their lanes, the bumpers are up. Very constrained, very, very focused, but everybody can expect to knock something down at the end of the day. Going a step further, as we proliferated our program, we started to see some very unique ways in which our students were contributing to conservation as a whole and contributing to our energy savings goals. These are just a few images of some of those innovative practices or creations on behalf of students. So what we did is we took their lanes and the bowling lanes, and we brought their bumpers down. And the students were given a very open platform by which they could be recognized for the way in which they could knock down their various pins on their lanes, removing the barriers, removing the bumpers that ensured that they would essentially knock something down in the end, which we had intended would improve their skill in the area of conservation. So we recreated this very comprehensive recognition program whereby students via the internet could upload evidence indicative of their unique contribution to conservation. And this was essentially taken carbon copy from a school district-wide initiative to enhance student engagement in all aspects of academia. But we specifically targeted toward energy conservation. We lost a bit of momentum in the marketing of this effort, but needless to say, we have lanes on the left, the bumpers are down, and essentially the students, faculty can come and use those lanes and attempt by any means of their choosing, roughly, to knock down the pins that represent energy dollars. I'm still trying to knock down the pins in the middle that are solid gold, but are separated by me by this very narrow strip that is a so-called lane. So what did we do with the maintenance side of the group? So how did we lower their bumpers? So they had some very constrained methods in which they were typically able to conserve energy, but mostly given primarily monthly data and interval data. So how did we lower the bumpers in their lanes? We lowered them by developing what is we refer to as an interactive diagnostic console. It was because of this of technological obsolescence that we needed to upgrade our system. So it just so happened that we needed to create a console in which every school in the district was represented by a discrete segment indicating critical energy savings parameters. So the maintenance personnel, essentially with the bumpers down, could now freely go about determining the best way to knock down their pins. This image, well, and we have some work to do because as you can see in this image, there are links to specific energy cap, energy dashboards. This image was taken over a break during which no school was in session. And unfortunately, by this image of the touchscreen, you can see there are red and green indicators. The green indicators indicate that a building is occupied. The red indicates that it's not. The green indicators throughout this image would suggest that there are a lot of buildings that were running during this break, and unfortunately, which means that we have a lot of work to do in the effort to get technician maintenance personnel adoption of its use. So we come to another condition, which is kind of the back of the house of my bowling alley. We have a situation which we discovered a chiller was plugged full of debris out of the cooling tower condenser water. And despite all the efforts to clean the heat exchanger, as you can see on the right, and try to get rid of that debris, literally it filled up in a matter of days. So how do we find situations in which we believe that our energy consumption is curtailed as best we can, but there are inherent challenges to the energy use of the equipment installed? So what did we decide to do? We decided to go about enhancing our energy collection methods and really documenting and standardizing it. What you see here is a lighting control panel integrated with a temperature control system, and it is by this document, this Building Automation and Energy Collection System standard, that we can now refine the means by which we expect to receive data and to display it. And the importance of us being able to display this data is such that we can use it to get that ball down the very narrow strip of a bowling lane to the pins that are made of pure gold. And what I mean by the pins of pure gold are those pins that represent our peak demand. So if we can readily ascertain and manipulate the data and better understand it in a way such that every end user or student, faculty, maintenance personnel realize its value, they can readily see the value that is produced in this Building IQ report, in which the data extracted from our system was used in turn to reduce the peak demand throughout the building. You can see that by the green indicator. And you can do things like automated demand response. You can do it through predictive energy optimization. And you can do outcome-based fault detection. So I have, through this data and through this document that I was able to standardize, I have a gyroscopic rocket fuel bowling ball that I'm using to knock down solid gold pins in my bowling alley. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Craig. God, you got me thinking about bowling there. I'm going to get us moving on here. Next up, we're going to have Martha Larson of Carleton College. And Martha is a mechanical engineer serving as manager of campus energy and sustainability at Carleton College in Minnesota. Martha spearheaded Carleton's climate action plan, which targets carbon neutrality by 2050, and managed the installation of Carleton's second 1.65 megawatt wind turbine. Hoping that we'll have still about 15 minutes for Q&A after Martha's presentation. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Martha.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. Just a few facts about Carleton. We are about 2 million square feet, and that's a combination of buildings on our central plant, which we control from a single facilities building, and about 50 or so off-campus houses. So the data that we get for those two groups of buildings is different in its intervals and quality. And then we have about 1,000 acres, which is primarily our arboretum. As far as environmental statistics go, I won't read this off word for word, but the big point is we have a lot of variation in our EUI depending on weather, especially being in such a cold climate. So it's weather normalization, and looking at how weather is affecting our data is very important for doing any type of comparisons. And our ultimate goal is to get our carbon emissions to net zero by the year 2050. We've made some progress on that. There's still a long way to go, but that's our goal. This is what our energy data looked like when I arrived at Carleton about 7 years ago. A lot of it was handwritten, hand logs, and it was managed by a lot of different people with a lot of different formats. And so compiling it into raw data and making useful data visualizations and graphs was really nearly impossible. We can only do it in limited ways, very targeted ways. We now use the Lucid Building OS system to consolidate all of our energy data in one place. This is just a snapshot of what that looks like. It's much better. It's really a fundamental step. It was a fundamental step for me to even be able to do my job as an energy manager. Summary of what we're metering right now between the off-campus houses and the district energy systems, about 97 buildings. District energy, we are sub-metering those buildings in 15-minute intervals for electricity, steam, condensate, water, and we have one little solar PV installation. We do not yet meter for chilled water, but that's our next goal. For the off-campus houses, all we really get are utility bills. So I get a monthly natural gas and electricity consumption and cost. But the building level meters are where we focused a lot of attention because those are all on our side of the utility meter, and we have more control over that. This is not meant to be read today, but I put it in here for future reference as you all get the slides of what we looked at when we were searching for an energy information system. This was back in 2010 through 2012. So we took almost, I would say, 18 months between a group of facilities people and IT personnel working together to evaluate systems. This is what brought us to choosing Lucid Building OS. I think a couple things that we saw there were they both had a strong dashboard component, which, as Craig mentioned, is important in an educational setting. But in addition to a strong dashboard, there was strong analytics and strong reporting for the facilities folks. And we were seeing a lot of the programs strong in facilities tended to have more techie interfaces that weren't as easy to use with students and also even with management personnel for nice, clean board level reporting. Or there was more emphasis on the dashboard, which was meant we didn't have as much in terms of data analytics and visualizations. So Lucid had a good balance between those two strengths is what we found. And then the second part, which really took a while, we started contracting with Lucid in fall of 2012, and it took about a year to get all of our metering and our integrations really smoothed out, because the first thing we saw when we integrated our meters with the system was where we had meter problems. And so that transparency was very important and a very critical first step, but it also took a while to iron all of that out because it meant dealing with our building automation systems vendor really in depth, and also just kind of a lot of meter hardware replacements. Once we got that all worked out, there was a year or two went by before we really dug in with an established process for looking at the data. As Hannah mentioned in the beginning, it's great to have data, it's great to have data visualizations, but you also need the process for viewing those, because right now that system isn't very automated. So this is just a list of the things that we do. I'll run through these briefly here in the webinar. These are things we do on a regular basis that have now allowed us to actually pull value out of our Lucid Building OS system because of the processes that we have in place. First thing I found essential was I can now very quickly check when my meters are offline. A lot of times, especially when maintenance or vendors are in the buildings, they'll they'll mess with the meter connections, and if I didn't know this, I could lose a week, a month, maybe 3 months of data before finding out that that meter was offline. Now I do get email alerts, and I can go in. I go in almost daily and just filter for offline meters. Sounds simple, but it's a pretty essential thing to have all your meters on and working. I have set up a few reports to send out to myself and our maintenance manager every week. This is an example of I've grouped the buildings into the academic buildings because they are of similar comparison. And we look at those each week for total energy use and then per square foot and per person, just to see if there are changes. And the reason we have these email out weekly is because we catch changes quickly. So you'll see later in my slides there's a couple of examples where because we noticed something right away, we were able to determine what the building use, what was different about the building use or the equipment operation that week without having to remember something months ago. We also have a little team, an energy team of myself and the maintenance manager at the core, and then I have a few students that work on this team. I train them to review the Lucid graphics, and we keep a log of issues. So it's important to have enough people able to do this type of management of the system in order to get the value out of it. And I think the balance between myself, who's looking at this fairly analytically as the energy manager, and the maintenance manager who gets involved with the actual implementation of the fixes and the projects, that's pretty key. We have a weekly meeting agenda, which is, of course, checking for meter issues, working through those. We look at our projects that are in process, and also then we review our graphics. And I'll go through this briefly now for the group. The maintenance manager and I also discuss capital projects. We have an ongoing utility master plan to install geothermal well fields, and we are in the process of doing building automation system upgrades. So it's also a good format for us to keep those things moving. We've partnered with our Carleton College Energy Club of volunteer students, but one of our paid student employees is the leader of that club, and they have gone out and done a lot of legwork for us in terms of auditing, counting fixtures, checking wattages, and really seeing what the potential is, especially with lighting, for reductions by using occupancy sensors, timers, and lower wattage fixtures, primarily LEDs. So part of our use of our energy information systems has been to target which buildings deserve an audit, which buildings do we think we have a lot of capacity for some change. So that's been very useful. It's also a great way to get the students involved, feet on the ground in the field. Every week we take a group of buildings and we look at the reports that we get from Lucid. I'll give you 3 examples that we look at most often, although there are many others. The heat maps are what we're using to make sure our building schedules have been maintained, that we haven't had any manual overrides, and that the buildings that should be tight, like a library where it has a set closing time, are really looking tight. I can see clearly spring break, I can see clearly summer break. That's a good example. In the dorms like this one, it's a little more scattered because we're talking about a residence hall with less regular hours. But still, I'm seeing during the day, as the students are leaving, things are kind of going to bed. It's sort of the opposite schedule from our academic buildings. But you can also see at the bottom there a huge data loss. This was an issue we identified right away, but it took the vendor quite a while to repair it. So this is why keeping an eye on those meters is so critical, because when we lose data, all of our graphics and our accumulations get screwed up. We do look at the load profile, which you saw earlier, and we're looking both at our base and our peak, the difference between them, the ratio, and also the actual value, because this is helping us get familiar with which buildings are sort of residing in which zones. And we not only look at the difference between peak and base, we say if there's a big difference between peak and base, we have possibly some room in our occupancy and what's happening when the building's occupied. But we also look at that base load and try to see if our equipment operation could be reduced at all during those unoccupied times. And then we look at our trend analysis just to look at a period of time a little bit longer and make sure these patterns are pretty regular. So we're also looking at these in comparison, occupied times like during the term versus unoccupied times like during breaks, just to, again, get familiar with where those values should be and look for anomalies where things are peaking or dipping unusually. few examples from our energy issues log. When we look at these graphs each week, we log anything that looks funny. We also log looks fine, just so we can kind of track what buildings we've reviewed. And here are just a few examples. I'll just point out one at the bottom. There's the Skinner Chapel. We suddenly found out that our chapel had jumped to the top of that building comparison list. Well, it didn't take very long to realize that the performance schedule in that building had been very high over the last week. They were using a lot of stage lighting, and that was the cause of that. Now, that wasn't something we could necessarily fix immediately, but we can look at those stage lights for the future, and we also at least knew that it happened. It didn't escape us as facilities managers. Lucid, we also use their performance measurement and verification tool, which does show us, in this case, a lighting project, where the values are now versus before the project. We can set those time frames and compare them and know when these project costs have paid back in terms of their energy savings. Few final observations. This is essential to have all this energy data organized in one place and able to be visualized in these graphic terms, because otherwise we can't manage what we can't measure, and if we can't manage what we're managing, that doesn't help either. So this is fundamental to being an energy manager, having this data organized. And the weekly meetings are how we are developing a consistent process for reviewing. Two things on the bottom here that are still challenges. I'm happy to be working with the Smart Energy Analytics campaign, because we're still struggling with the fact that our energy graphics are not connected to our building automation system. So we can see an anomaly in the energy graphics, but we can't always immediately connect that to the equipment operation. And secondly, it's still a very manual process. We are still having to spend an hour every week sitting down looking at graphics and manually finding the anomalies, which is why it's important to look at them every week so that we know what's normal in order to determine what's not normal. And that's a long process, but we're looking forward to automating some of these things where there are obvious anomalies we can look for that are known. So that's really how we're using our system right now, and we're looking forward to using it even more efficiently and effectively in the future.
Wow, thank you so much, Martha, and thanks, Craig, again for your presentation. I'm going to jump right into the Q&A section here. I am always brimming with questions myself, but I'll go to some of the audience questions here. This one is specifically to you, Martha. Can you elaborate on the integration process of the meter data and utility data into the Lucid system? What were the challenges? How is the data delivered? Is it all real time? And I realize that could probably be a whole webinar by itself, but if you could just maybe spend a minute to give an overview on that, would be wonderful.
Sure. The 1-minute overview is that we have probably, I think, 5 or 6 different integrations, because some of our meters are IP addressable. Those are a lot easier to integrate. And most of them go through our Siemens building automation system or our automated logic building automation system. Those are different processes depending on the vendors. Some of them are sort of a script that manually pushes a CSV file out to a folder where Lucid picks it up. And some of those are a little bit more automated, like an API, an automated program interface type transfer. So it really depends. And like Elliot said, that could be its own webinar, but I'd be happy to, if somebody wanted to email me questions, follow up. The second piece is our utility bills. Lucid has a partner that they work with who developed a script for going and grabbing our utility bills off of our account website in sort of a protected way, view only, and then using an OCR text recognition process to scrape the information from the utility bills. That just saves us the manual process of going through 50 different bills every month and manually entering cost and consumption. So it's been very valuable on both fronts.
Great. Thanks, Martha. We had a similar question come up when Craig was doing his presentation. It relates specifically to the submetering. So how much submetering is in place in the Aurora public schools, Craig?
We really don't have any submetering, just metering, interval metering at the main meter. But the fact that we're starting to push out actual building automation system data concerning set points, et cetera, and allowing a service to crunch that information and kind of tune it against real weather forecasts, we are able to get controllability of our system to account for actual changes in weather forecast nearly on the hour. And we're piloting this project with Building IQ through, and it's the support of the financing of it is coming through our local utility.
Okay, great, thanks. And then another question came up back to you, Martha. I think one of your graphics mentioned KPIs per person, and the question was how you're measuring occupancy.
The Lucid Building Automation System, or the Lucid Building OS system, allows us to enter a building profile, which includes square footage, the building type, a little photo, and then also the number of occupants. And because we sort of know those occupancy levels based on our student population. And I do enter a value that represents the population when the campus is occupied, and that's static. So that piece I take sort of with a grain of salt. I look more often at the per square foot values. That's really what I'm using most often. Okay,
great. Then a general question. I'm curious, maybe I'll put this to you first, Craig. Are there any things that you would do differently if you were starting over? What are the main pearls of wisdom that you've picked up along the way?
Well, I guess thanks, Elliot. Going back to my bowling analogy and the fact that I felt that we built the Taj Mahal of energy collection bowling alleys, it really would have served me well if I had done a much better job of communicating to all stakeholders involved, the value of this energy collection system and the extent to which it's desirable for all stakeholders to engage with it. Really maintain the communication and really, I guess, hold the hands of those who are still accustomed to using the bumpers on their lanes, that when you drop the lanes or put them in a paradigm shift that maybe those bumpers weren't ever there in the first place, to just take a risk and really feel motivated that they're part of the solution. That's the biggest message that I would send forward.
Great, thanks. And same for you, Martha?
Yeah, I think what I didn't realize, what we found out as we went through the process was how involved our building automation systems vendors had to be in that integration process, and how involved they still are as we have, meters that go out. Oftentimes it's their firmware updates or their, panel replacement projects that are doing that. So I think I definitely learned that it's important to understand how this is going to integrate, or how you're going to get data and how it's going to integrate with other vendors. Because it ends up being a chain of responsibility there. But we've overcome that, and I think we're in a very good place. I think I would have started earlier developing my workflow process, because I feel like I lost a year or two even of sort of dipping into the system and looking at things, but not having a really consistent way of looking at them regularly and recording and tracking the things I was observing. And so that's, like I said, still a very manual process, but at least it has a process now. And you have to give some time, you have to be prepared to give some staff time to doing that, or you don't get enough out of your system.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. We hear that from other participants too, that challenge and knowing what to look for and resourcing it effectively. Next question here from the audience. This is for you, Martha, again about submeters. How helpful have submeters been? How expensive, challenging were they?
They're becoming less expensive. Craig showed in his photo in eGauge, which is what we use for our solar PV. Things like that are not very expensive. They're IP addressable, easy to integrate. So I feel like it's getting better. We have not found it too difficult to submeter, and we made that commitment because, again, you can't manage what you don't measure. So at each building, we don't submeter by floor or by room or by system, but we do submeter each building, because without that, we really don't have any visibility. It's very, very hard to parse out one value at the central plant and make anything of that. It's really impossible. So I think it's critical to do it, but the ways of doing it are becoming easier and less expensive.
Thanks. Next question is around kiosking displays, so kind of publicly accessible dashboards that occupants might use. I'll ask this one to Craig first. So, do you have them? How effective have you found them to be?
The kiosks, it's interesting, and this, the test was suggested of me that, when you first install a kiosk, go back every week and see, wipe off the fingerprints. And then as time progresses, over a course of months, go back and once you wipe off the fingerprints, see if any new fingerprints are there. And interestingly enough, you'll find, or that this person's experience was that, it didn't take very long before folks pretty much became uninspired by the use of their kiosk in their building. So what we have is the ability, to embed utility information data onto school district websites, or having open access to our utility building system, public access, that's available via any PC or mobile device. So I believe that kiosks are more going away and more toward just handheld use by those that are interested.
Thanks, Greg. And Martha?
I would 100% agree with Craig on that. We've found it better to put this stuff integrated into websites and kind of place it strategically rather than having physical kiosks. They were often, the hardware was hard to keep up. It would fail after a year of being on 24/7. It just burns them out, and then they look even dumber because they're sitting there black. And our students quickly pointed out we're talking about energy conservation using a screen that we are leaving on all day and all night. It's kind of counter to the goal. So we've moved to only a web-based interface.
Thank you. Now I'm going to just squeeze one more last question in and hope you can each answer this difficult question in about 30 seconds. It's about the financial side, the initial investment. Just wondering, on what basis was that justified? Was it an ROI or a champion project or a strategic project? So that's the first piece. How was it initially justified? And then in terms of assuring you have ongoing resources to maintain the system, is that just an operational expense, or how is that finance justified? If it's possible to briefly describe that, I'll go to Martha first on this one.
Certainly. I think first and foremost we justified it as an operations expense, just like you wouldn't expect your finance department to operate without some sort of budgeting software. This is the energy manager's version of a energy budgeting software. It gives us visibility, transparency, and reporting that we couldn't otherwise do. So we feel like we have to have it. We did get a small grant for kind of a data visualization grant to help with the startup costs, but we would have needed to do this either way, with or without the grant. Otherwise, we can't do our job.
Great. And Craig?
And I would say that we've got tremendous help from our community and nonprofit organizations. Our first meters were donated to us. Our local utility, Xcel Energy, is kind of been the first in the country that I'm aware of to pilot a program to rebate energy information systems, and even to the extent that they rebate the build-out of building automation systems is tremendous. So there are great financial support mechanisms.
Thanks very much, Craig. Well, Craig, Martha, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed those presentations, and we had great attendance. For everyone who's still on the line here, I assume you've read this final slide, and hopefully you can reach out to us and keep engaged. So thank you to the team here for coordinating and organizing this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you all again at next webinar. Thank you.